Bridge. Well, let's get some analysis from Ondrej Ditrych, a senior analyst with the European Union Institute for Security Studies here in Paris. Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Just first, are you expecting anything radical to come out of this summit, or is it more of a photo op than anything else?
I don't expect anything radical to happen. That would be, I think, a major surprise. Though, of course, it will have some repercussions. We can expect several scenarios that come out of this and may have some sort of bearing on the future of the talks.
Can you walk us through some of those scenarios?
Sure. So I'd say that perhaps from the perspective of Ukraine and Europeans, the worst case is some sort of a deal that would be an effective capitulation, and that would then be imposed on Kyiv and on Europeans. I think this is now fairly unlikely to happen. Then we can have something slightly different, little less worse, perhaps a deal that would be bad for Ukraine and that Kyiv would either reject or accept, but at a very high cost. It would reject it at the cost of withdrawal of US support, or it would accept it, but it would mean, giving up some of its territory or effective control of it for perhaps a very long time, and perhaps even more importantly, constraining its defenses. And I think perhaps the best outcome that Europeans can hope for is actually no deal, while President Trump recognizes that President Putin is not seriously interested in peace. And the US may continue to seek sort of limited normalization, while, however, maintaining support to Ukraine, sort of a pressure point on Russia. And then, a fourth outcome, I'd say, is that President Putin plays this badly. President Trump is disappointed and decides to hit Russia with sanctions, which is incidentally what Europeans have been asking for if Russia doesn't agree to a ceasefire now in Anchorage.
And of those scenarios, which one would you say is the most likely that you're expecting to see?
Well, I'd say that at the moment, it's probably the third one out of those that I mentioned. It's a little less because of all the noise that we keep hearing, and some of that noise is clearly being deliberately issued, starting from Putin's deliberately unacceptable public demands to President Trump's talk about land swap and all that. I think it boils down to sort of basic interests that Russia and the US have. I think that Russia and under President Putin is not really interested in getting this piece of territory or that. Ultimately, in the last instance, it's about liquidating Ukraine as a sovereign nation and restoring Russian empire over Eastern Europe, whereas the US administration is clearly interested in normalizing relations with Russia.
Would you say that this summit is already a success for Putin just based on the mere fact that it's happening at all, and particularly on US territory?
Absolutely. I do believe so. I think that diplomatic talks on their own with adversaries are not a reward, of course. But that being said, this particular summit is a win for Vladimir Putin even before it started. Russia just very recently was threatened with crippling tariffs to be imposed by the US. Then President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, goes to Moscow, apparently with a rather generous offer of reintegration of Russia into world economy. And now President Putin is coming to Anchorage with a sizable entourage, clearly to discuss not just his war on Ukraine, but potential other areas of cooperation, and will seek to entice, I believe, the US with, among other, an offer of some sort of vague promise of strategic talks, renewal of nuclear arms control agreements and such.
Do you think that Putin's overtures will work on Trump? I mean, can Donald Trump be trusted to protect Ukraine's sovereignty, or is he ultimately, guided by other interests?
I think that I mentioned those basic interests, though I think also there has been a certain shift in the US position recently. I think it is safe to say that the US administration now listens more to Europeans. There have been consultations, including on red lines. Europeans, while not being at the table, clearly have engaged in, I'd say, sort of preemptive damage control, and not, it's perhaps too early to say, but likely not without success. It's, of course, still sort of a guessing game, but I think the chances are that we avoid one of those bad outcomes that I mentioned.
Trump has said he's not going to be intimidated by Putin. Do you think he's going to keep that promise? Do you think we're going to see kind of a lot of grandstanding from both sides?
Again, it's quite hard to say. That there are, of course, historic precedents, including their very first summit meeting in Helsinki in 2018, which did not go so well, which incidentally also started with a private meeting, one-to-one, with only interpreters present, and then there was another meeting with the delegations, and you will remember, in the viewers also, that at the press conference that followed, President Trump made those controversial statements about Russia not being involved in trying to manipulate the outcome of the US election in 2016. It's really hard to predict how this can go, but if we take into account those sort of basic objectives, I think that provides a certain guidance.
What is Trump hoping to get out of this summit? What would make him consider it a success?
I think what he would consider a success is, let's say, a pathway to a ceasefire, which could be matched with steps on the US side in terms of suspension of at least some sanctions. What Russia is interested now is, I think, now particularly sanctions on the banking sector. So if some of those are suspended, Russia can benefit from better access to imports. So yes, I think President Trump, as far as I can say, and I'm not a specialist, I'm not an expert on US politics, is clearly interested in cultivating this image of being a peace broker. I think he recently mentioned that he managed to solve 6 conflicts, world conflicts, in 6 months. So I think this is clearly a motivation. That I think anything that would eventually lead to normalization of relationship with Russia, I think also would be seen as a success, because my sense is that this is clearly the US administration's interest now to have the relations normalized, the conflict in Ukraine to sort of disappear from the relationship. And the big question, of course, is whether this objective sort of trumps ultimately the commitment of the US to the sovereignty of Ukraine as a nation.
All right, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. We'll be keeping those scenarios you laid out for us in mind. Ondrej Ditrych, thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with us. That's Ondrej Ditrych, a senior analyst with the European Union Institute for Security Studies here in Paris.